A sunken WWII ship, a $3 billion secret, and a man who promised fortune but delivered only lies. For decades, no one questioned the legend until the truth surfaced. This isn't just a treasure hunt, it's one of history's boldest cons. During World War II, numerous ships carrying silver, gold, platinum, and other valuables sank to the ocean floor, most of them British or Soviet vessels paying the United States for wartime supplies. After the war, some of these sunken ships were even raised from the deep. The hunt for such treasures attracted everyone from seasoned professionals to outright con artists and adventurers. One such story is the tale we're about to tell. The British refrigerated cargo ship. Port Nicholson, owned by London-based Portline, was built in 1918 and primarily carried perishable goods requiring refrigeration. It was a sizable vessel, displacement of 8,400 tons, 479 feet, 146 meters long, 62 feet, 19 meters wide, with a cargo capacity of 328,000 cubic feet, 9,300 cubic meters. When World War II broke out, the Port Nicholson remained in service, hauling cargo around the globe. Its final voyage began in Halifax, Nova Scotia. On June 14, 1942, it set sail for Wellington, New Zealand, with a planned stop in New York and transit through the Panama Canal. At the time, it was part of Convoy XB-25, a coastal convoy route running between Halifax Harbor and Boston. The ship was under the command of its owner, Harold Charles Jeffrey, and carried 1,600 tons of automobile parts and 4,000 tons of military equipment. Unbeknownst to the convoy, German submarine U-87, a Type 7IB U-boat commanded by Joachim Berger, was tracking them. U-87 had departed on May 19, 1942, and laid a minefield of 15 TMB mines off Boston. Interestingly, not a single Allied ship was ever lost to that minefield during the war, and the Allies didn't even know the mines were there until after the war ended. After reloading with torpedoes, U-87 went hunting on June 15th. At 4:17 a.m., on June 16, 1942, about 100 miles off Portland, Maine, it fired a torpedo at the convoy. A minute later, it fired a second. Rough seas prevented Berger from observing the results, so he assumed at least one hit its mark. In reality, both torpedoes struck the Port Nicholson. The first hit the engine room, the second the stern. 2 men in the engine room died instantly, and the ship began to sink by the stern. The rest of the crew abandoned ship and were rescued by the Royal Canadian Navy corvette, Nanaimo. But the Port Nicholson didn't sink right away. By dawn, it was still afloat. That morning, a boarding party of 8, led by the ship's owner, 2 officers from the destroyer, and 5 sailors, was sent over in a small boat to inspect the damage and assess whether the ship could be towed to safety. They signaled that all seemed well. Yet just 45 minutes later, the stern suddenly began sinking fast. The 8 men rushed back to their boat, but it couldn't get clear in time. As the Port Nicholson went under, it dragged the boat and most of its occupants down with it. Only 2 sailors survived. Back in Boston, shaken survivors and crew members told haunting stories, legends really, about the lost men sacrificing themselves to protect some mysterious, valuable cargo. That's likely where the myth began, that the Port Nicholson was carrying platinum. The tragedy even made the front pages of the Boston Globe, Boston's largest daily newspaper. But here's the truth. There was no evidence the ship carried gold, platinum, or any other treasure. Even if such cargo had been secretly undeclared on the manifest, where would it have come from? By late 1941, Britain's gold and foreign reserves were nearly exhausted. There was no British Treasury stash in Canada, and wartime practice dictated that high-value shipments like precious metals were carried only by major warships, often cruisers or larger, escorted by protective convoys. The Atlantic was crawling with German U-boat wolf packs after all. The Port Nicholson came to rest on the ocean floor at a depth of 700 feet, where it would lie undisturbed for nearly 70 years. In 2008, Greg Brooks, a treasure hunter from Gorham, Maine, and owner of the vessel Sea Hunter, announced he'd discovered a mysterious shipwreck he called Blue Baron, allegedly loaded with immense riches. He claimed he'd known the wreck's location for years and had spent that time securing permits and raising funds for a recovery operation. Brooks was a professional treasure hunter. For decades, he'd scoured the Atlantic off Haiti and the Florida Keys, chasing legends of Spanish doubloons, pirate loot, and bars of silver and gold. With sun-bleached hair and ocean-blue eyes, he looked every bit the weathered sea captain, salt-streaked, confident, and full of tales as alluring as mermaid songs. But fortune hadn't smiled on him. Despite his swagger, he'd never found a major treasure. Now he told potential investors he was about to recover billions of dollars worth of Russian platinum from the sunken Port Nicholson. He promised returns of 100 to 1 and kept using the word guaranteed, says Gary Ouellette, a Gorham resident and one of Brooks's early backers. He sold us on the idea that within a year we'd all be multimillionaires. Ouellette, a staffing agency manager in Portland, invested nearly $42,000, the largest sum of his life, in Brooks's company, Sea Hunters. He says Brooks showed investors photos of gold bars and boasted about his experience with deep-sea salvage, including work on a shipwreck near the Florida Keys called Notre Dame de Deliverance. That 1755 galleon, Brooks claimed, held treasures worth $3.2 billion, but, he said, a U.S. court blocked recovery due to unresolved legal disputes with Spain. Brooks also promoted his Massachusetts-based researcher, Ed Michaud, a man with over a decade of experience, as one of the world's top deep-sea investigators. He used to say we didn't have the best equipment, recalls Rocky Myers, a Gorham middle school gym teacher who invested just over $10,000. But we had the best lawyers and the best researchers. Gorham is a small town of 16,000 people near Portland, with a tight-knit community where word travels fast and reputation matters. Crucially, Brooks had the backing of one of Gorham's most respected citizens, John Hardy Sr., owner of a Lazy Boy furniture store, generous philanthropist, and Brooks's landlord. Hardy was also the sole partner in Sea Hunters. Many trusted Brooks simply because Hardy vouched for him. Together, Brooks and Hardy raised more than $5 million to raise the Port Nicholson. Most came from middle-class investors in southern Maine, some from wealthier speculators in New York. Ouellette says he knows about 100 people who invested. It feels like half of Gorham got involved, he said. Brooks spent $2 million buying a 30-year-old 200-foot offshore supply vessel from Louisiana, which he renamed the MV Sea Hunter. He outfitted it with a $400,000 remotely operated underwater vehicle, ROV, for deep-sea exploration. In interviews with the Portland Press Herald, Brooks claimed the Port Nicholson held the richest shipwreck in the world, worth $3 to $5 billion. The Sea Hunter first set sail in July 2009. But by season's end, there was no treasure. The next summer, Brooks tried again. Still nothing. After a third fruitless summer, investors, now seeing no returns, grew uneasy. Brooks blamed bad weather, strong currents, lost anchors, and equipment failures. Yet he remained relentlessly optimistic. He kept coming back for more money, Ouellette says. More and more money. In January 2012, Brooks issued another press release titled $3 billion boldest shipwreck found in Boston Harbor's backyard. He claimed some crates he'd spotted near the wreck resembled ingot boxes like those recovered from the HMS Edinburgh in 1981, which carried 465 gold bars. He needed fresh investors, and the media took the bait. Fox News, the Boston Globe, and even CBS ran stories. CBS filmed Brooks aboard the Sea Hunter, docked at a Boston marina, and aired his claim on Valentine's Day, 2012. "We've found $3 billion worth of platinum." Viewers saw what appeared to be an edited cargo manifest listing 1,707,000 ounces of platinum, allegedly sourced from U.S. Treasury archives. Brooks and researcher Ed Michaud had hunted treasure together for nearly 20 years. They made a formidable team. Brooks had a gift for selling big dreams, while Michaud excelled at uncovering documents that seemed to confirm those dreams, papers that somehow slipped past other treasure hunters. They'd pulled similar stunts before. Back in 1993, Brooks convinced John Hardy Sr. to invest in his underwater ambitions. Brooks bought a ship and spent 2 years searching off Haiti, the Bahamas, and South Carolina, until he claimed equipment failure forced him home. That same year, Michaud announced he'd found U-1226 Maas, a German sub sunk by a U.S. Navy pilot in October 1944, just 4 miles off Cape Cod. The Boston Herald even paid him to scan the seabed with sonar, but no sub was found. Military historians insisted there was no record of a U-boat sinking in that location. There were other failed ventures, all funded by trusting investors, but never any real results. Their biggest hoax came in 2002, when Brooks announced he'd located the French merchant galleon Notre Dame de Deliverance near the Florida Keys. "It was one of the richest ships ever lost," he told Florida's Daily Business Review. He gave the Palm Beach Post a detailed inventory: 170 pounds of gold bars in 17 chests, 15,399 gold doubloons, 172,000 diamonds in barrels, 6 chests of emeralds, and a sword with a solid gold hilt. He credited Michaud for the research, but again, nothing materialized. The supposed wreck turned out to be scattered debris, much of it inside a national marine sanctuary. Over 5 long years, Brooks scanned the seabed with sonar, magnetometers, and cameras, finding only anchors and cannons. He later blamed sanctuary regulations for making the project too expensive. It was from this failed scheme that the Port Nicholson story was born. Brooks promised investors he'd use its treasure to repay them for their losses on Notre Dame. Rumors soon spread. The Port Nicholson carried 71 tons of platinum, 16 million carats of diamonds, 10 tons of gold bars, 100 pounds, 500 kilars of rough diamonds, plus tons of copper and tin, all supposedly Soviet payment to the U.S. under Lend-Lease. But the facts don't add up. Yes, the Soviet Union did buy strategic materials from the U.S. with gold, but only before Lend-Lease began in October 1941. Under Lend-Lease, payments were deferred until after the war. So the Port Nicholson couldn't have been carrying Lend-Lease-related treasure in 1942. As for British valuables, Britain's treasury was essentially empty by then. It paid for U.S. supplies with colonial assets and shares in American companies. And after Lend-Lease kicked in, it didn't pay at all until the war ended. There's another problem. Global platinum production before WWII averaged only about 15.5 tons per year. So 71 tons, nearly 5 years' worth of worldwide output, on a single ship? Extremely unlikely. And the USSR, which produced about 5 tons annually before the war, used nearly 80% of it for industrial purposes. It's doubtful they had that much surplus platinum to ship. Some even claimed 2 Soviet envoys were aboard and that Moscow reimbursed the U.S. for the lost cargo, meaning the U.S. government wouldn't claim the treasure. But every commercial shipment requires insurance. Yet no record exists of any insurer or consortium paying out a massive claim for such a loss in 1942. Given all this, it's safe to say the treasure Brooks described simply never existed. In December 2013, Brooks put the Sea Hunter up for sale and laid off most of his crew. A group of investors who'd provided over $8 million sued him for fraud, accusing him of fabricating the existence of platinum and other valuables. In court, Brooks admitted to federal judge George Singal that he'd misled investors using forged historical documents supplied by Ed Michaud. In April 2015, the court banned Brooks from engaging in shipwreck treasure hunting. Federal investigators launched a fraud probe, but on December 7, 2018, the FBI announced it was closing the case due to the statute of limitations on federal fraud charges. And so ended yet another scam, born from the chaos of World War II and fueled by the greed of those hoping to profit from its tragedies.